On March 2nd, we will be having a new moon in Pisces. It's coming up pretty soon. And this is going to be my uh, horoscope reading video for each of the 12 signs. And before I get started, I guess I'll just say that it's an interesting new moon because we're having the perfection of the Venus Mars Pluto conjunction at the same time, and also the perfection of the Mercury and Saturn in Aquarius conjunction. So there's lots of really tight conjunctions happening right at the moment of the new moon, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And so what my reading is going to focus on is not just the this lunation cycle, but also the conjunctions that are playing into it. I'm not going to spend too much time in this introduction. I'm just going to jump right into it and get started with. I wrote. I'm doing it in a different order. I'm going to do Cancer first, like the Thema Mundi order, just to switch things up a little bit. Hopefully, it doesn't throw people off too much. So here's the chart for Cancer rising. Um, First off, you've got a lot of action in the seventh house with Mars conjunct Venus conjunct Pluto, and the seventh house has to do with marriage, partnership, as well as open enemies, and it's the opposition is the nature of the seventh house. So it could be people you're either working with in a close one-on-one partnership, or it could be someone you're feeling an opposition with, an opposition towards, or your relation to the other in general. But with Mars exalted in that sign, there's that certain aggressive, assertive, militant quality coming through with Mars, a bit of social friction maybe that I talked about in my Venus on, or sorry, my episode on this subject. Um, and Pluto can bring in a kind of obsessive quality that like a fixation, right? Like it's sort of like a you when you combining with the quality of desire of Venus and the drivenness of Mars, there's also a kind of obsessive, fixated, won't give up, maybe like a long standing kind of thing going on. And all these intense energies are coming together in the seventh house, which is an angular house. So it's especially strong for Cancer people, all having to do with the relationship sector of the Cancer rising, these sort of with the Pluto, the sort of brooding, obsessive kind of quality, and maybe like a hell bent on getting what you want in a relationship, or try to settle the score with somebody or something like that. Um, as if we look at the eighth house usually stands for things such as loss and death, or adjacent to the seventh house, it's like the belongings of the partner. Or sometimes it's also considered to be things which are acquired through loss, like when somebody passes away and you inherit their stuff. Um, because Saturn is here, Saturn, you know, before they had the Grim Reaper, Saturn had the scythe and the sickle, and he sort of stood for death and endings and stuff like that, which kind of can bring out that quality of the eighth house, I think, especially because Saturn's traditionally in dignity in Aquarius. You put that together with Mercury, the communicator, the deal maker. Um, I read the Mercury and Saturn conjunction in the eighth house. Maybe it's something to do with like litigation around inheritance, or settling, maybe outstanding debts or something like that. Um, but there's definitely that kind of like, Mercury could be like a lawyer, or he could be like a broker, or like a mediator even. Another thing which could be is that if there's um, like a divorce. I was thinking that if there's like a divorce settlement, the seventh house would indicate the actual kind of personal dispute between the person and their partner. And then the eighth house would be like Mercury, the lawyer, the contractual agreements, writing things, who gets what if there's a divorce, the prenuptial agreements, things like that. And the Saturn there with that kind of like heavy set in stone quality, or that marking the ending of something, right? Like this is ended now, and now we bring in the lawyers to split it all up and all that kind of thing. I'm getting, especially when you put that together, the seventh and the eighth, I'm getting these vibes pretty heavily from the Cancer rising chart. And it could be relational, it could be like splitting up with a business partner or something. But there's definitely a kind of like the sense of an ending and some sort of conflict maybe that's coming to a peak, and the kind of a mediation or legal settlement around those kinds of things. Maybe it takes a different shape, but this is what my impression is, just kind of going off a chart like this. But to get to the actual new moon in Pisces itself, um, that's all happening in the ninth house, which is interesting because it's a Pisces new moon, very spiritual, watery, intuitive Pisces, and Jupiter is there, Neptune is there. Jupiter was the traditional ruler of Pisces. Modern people associate Neptune with it, but both Jupiter has the quality of like a benevolent, generous teacher. And having that Jupiter well dignified in the ninth means that it could be a good time for some sort of like spiritual lesson, or the ninth stands for lessons that you need help from a higher institution that you wouldn't be able to learn on your own. So it's like um, the teacher is necessary as being an external figure who's farther along on the journey to show you something that you can't figure out yourself. If it's not a spiritual thing, it could also be like, learning something from university that you would really not be able to do just on your own. Um, and the Neptune there could involve a sort of aspiring towards a higher ideal. And there's a kind of a question of whether those ideals are grounded in reality or if they're too lofty in their aspirations. Or maybe there's a could be kind of a naive sense of puritanism or innocence or something like that. Like there's a kind of like naive optimism that things are gonna have a perfect solution, but it's because um, like it's the if you think of the Garden of Eden metaphor, before they eat the apple from the tree of knowledge, there's this sort of like um, lacking the awareness of like the flaw, and I think that's it. You gotta watch out for Neptune with that. I mean, it's also in the ninth house, so there's sort of like, I'm thinking like weird cult dynamics and stuff like that, or some wacky belief systems maybe. But Jupiter is a you know Jupiter in Pisces I read as being more positive, but it's kind of mixed with that Neptune influence, which could create some hazards potentially. But what astrology is helpful for is to bring this up so we can have these conversations. So don't say I didn't warn you or anything. But it could, yeah, it's a nice one for anything to do with spirituality, with that Jupiter and Neptune in the ninth house. But as you know, all these things like those this kind of business can get dicey at times. And I don't probably need to go into all the bad stuff that happens around cults and religious organizations and stuff like that. And I think that Neptune can kind of be both that sort of like maybe you're naive if you don't see it, or that maybe you're deluded or corrupted or something. Like there could be something that's not quite as good. If it's too good to be true, maybe it is too good to be true, right? Um, so that's something to watch out for. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so for Leo, we've got this intense Mars Venus Pluto triple conjunction happening in the sixth house. And the sixth house stands for stuff like hard work, like manual labor, the grunt work. And it's the sixth house is traditionally the joy of Mars, and Capricorn is the exaltation of Mars. So for Leo, this is a particularly strong Mars energy in the house that has to do with that sort of tough Mars manual labor, getting stuff done, taking care of business. Maybe not the most glamorous kind of thing, but it's uh, you're getting her done kind of stuff. Like if there's good getting it done energy here, although with the Pluto there could be a tremendous amount of like pressure to get it done. Um, it could also the sixth house also has to do with things like getting into fights, um, getting to conflicts and stuff like that. So there could be some sort of like pretty explosive, heated exchanges, and Venus being the social element. So it could just be a verbal argument or a disagreement or something. But there's sort of like some pretty like it's packing a punch here basically. So be careful not to get too carried away with that kind of aggressive confrontational Mars stuff going on. Um, if we move over to Aquarius, the other sign that's ruled by Saturn traditionally, that is the seventh house for Leo rising, and the seventh house has to do with relationships and partnerships and things like that. And there is Mercury conjunct Saturn perfectly at the time of this new moon. And because Capricorn and Aquarius are both Saturn ruled signs, we can say that the stuff I was talking about earlier regarding that kind of explosive, confrontational, aggressive kind of energy coming through with Mars there, that is in Saturn's domain because that Capricorn's a Saturn sign. And so we can see that there's a connection with that with the relationship house too. So it could be possible that the tensions that are arising could be also around the one-on-one relationship area. That could be marital disputes. That could be tensions within close one-on-one friendships or business partnerships, or maybe working with a certain client, professional relationship that's proving to have some difficulties. Um, the Mercury that's there, though, is a sign that there's at least communication happening around this lunation and things getting kind of worked out or mediated. But because there's all this Venus, Mars, Pluto stuff, there's some pretty strong pent up energy that is making the conflict look kind of difficult here, to say the least. So I would be wary of that. That's the Saturn stuff, anyways. Um, I was also thinking that Saturn stands for this stuff about an attitude of seriousness or heaviness. Alchemically speaking, Saturn is the lead weight. Um, And when you have that in the relational area, and then having this Venus Mars stuff happening as well, that and Mercury being the communicator, there's certain like talking about stuff which could be heavy and serious, or this whole kind of thing that like serious long-term relationships that involve certain commitments, certain responsibilities, things like that. Um, if people use the expression like putting the work in to relationships, that like it's not just fun and games or a bed of roses, that it may take some hard work, that this could, with that Venus, Mars, Pluto in the sixth, all about that grunt work. And then that's also associating in with the seventh house. It could just be like also you and your partner have to get some actual physical labor done. That's not about working things out in the relationship. Maybe there's just a big job you have to do. But it could also be that maybe there's something in the relationship that's like moving a massive boulder to like, and it takes some, emotional labor, as they would say, right? Like that could be another perhaps possibility. Hard relational work with this one. Um, the eighth house itself is where you get the new moon happening. And the eighth house is kind of funny because the eighth house is usually, things that are associated with loss or outstanding debts or the stuff that you share with your partner. And there's the fact that Jupiter is there sort of emphasizes that there's a certain generosity or maybe even a certain gain to be had there, or it could also be a big expense depending on how you're looking at it. Especially Jupiter in the eighth could be a lot, maybe even. But if you tie that in with all the stuff I was talking about with Saturn and Venus and Mars and Pluto, is that there's a certain conflict getting resolved and stuff like that. But there could be, with the eighth house stuff, there could be something that needs to be paid, right? There could be like an outstanding debt or like a legal fee to be settled or something like that. It could also be the eighth house you have to be careful for because it can be a escapist kind of tendency. Whereas if Saturn ruled signs like Capricorn and Aquarius take an attitude of being maybe even self-sacrificial, like we need to just toughen up and get the job done and see it through and all this kind of stuff, like not cutting any slack. These are Saturn kind of attitudes. Jupiter could say like, "Oh man, I feel really sorry for you. Why don't you take a break? Why don't you give yourself some slack? Why don't like, hey, maybe you can like, crack a beer or whatever, right? Like it's trying to um in internal family systems therapy, there's this idea called the firefighter, which is like it's trying to like rescue and make things better, but it may be in the eighth house, it may be doing so in such a way that's maybe escapist. And I think with Neptune there could be that sort of quality of intoxication or head in the clouds, daydreamy as a way to kind of like escape the reality of the situation as represented by the Saturn signs of Aquarius and Capricorn. So I think that when the new moon in Pisces is in the eighth house here, there could be a recommendation to be cautious because there could be the tendency not to face the hard realities of the Saturn stuff and kind of whatever, go for some kind of like Neptunian pain reliever to give you some relief or something like that. And maybe in moderation, it's okay to do a little bit, but I mean, it's that's what comes up for me anyways when I see this eighth house stuff. For Virgo rising, the new moon in Pisces is taking place in the seventh house, which has to do with relationships. And I would say because the new moon is conjunct with Jupiter in Pisces, it's a fairly positive sign. Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces, and it's said that if you want to get technical about things here, when you're in your own domicile, it gives you this thing called the chariot, which protects it from the combustion from the rays of the sun. So if this was happening in a different sign, Jupiter would be kind of burnt up and exposed to the rays of the sun, and that would be kind of overpowering Jupiter. But when we have a Pisces situation, Jupiter is still very strong, and it's a good. The sun gets that good Jupiter influence, and the new moon itself represents a kind of initiating a new beginning in this area, and having that traditional Jupiter there is a good sign. So if there's anything in this lunation that has to do with a new marriage, a new boyfriend or girlfriend, a new partnership, business partnership, or even just like, maybe one-on-one best friend things, that, or it's all pretty positive in those respects in a Virgo rising chart at this point in time. However, Neptune is there, so there's something about the Neptune influence which could be like maybe something seems like it's too good to be true, and then usually things that are too good to be true usually too are, and then later down the line, then you're like, oh, why was I such a fool? I didn't see this stuff, from the beginning, and all this kind of stuff. Especially with the moon and the new moon there with Neptune, that there's something there in the beginning that maybe you're kind of naive about, that you're not you're there could provide a kind of Neptune beer goggles where everything looks so much more alluring and appealing, and you're kind of like, um, your hormones get the best of you or something like that, and you don't come to your senses until later. So that I think the Neptune intoxicating, deluding quality may put a spin on it, which you could look out for. But other than that, I think that the Jupiter signifies that there is something that's genuinely positive about this one. Um, yeah, it's looking pretty good. However, when we get into the other stuff going on in the astrology around this new moon, we deal with Saturn ruled signs, and Saturn stuff is generally a bit more difficult. So if you look at what is being ruled by Saturn here, we have uh, Venus, Mars, Pluto, and Capricorn in the fifth, and Saturn and Mercury in Aquarius in the sixth, and they're all perfectly conjunct, which means these are pretty strong conjunctions. The fifth house has to do with, if you're a parent, it's gonna say something about your children, and if I was a parent and I saw Venus, Mars, and Pluto in the fifth, that would look like quite a handful in terms of what the kids are going through. And with the whatever coronavirus pandemic and all this kind of stuff, I can only imagine it must be pretty difficult to be a parent. Um, the fifth is the joy of Venus, though, and Venus is kind of like running up against all this Mars Pluto stuff. But the Venus and there is at least a social quality there coming through when you have Venus, Mars, Pluto in the fifth house, and the fifth house is about having fun. So it's like if there was a way to have fun with these energies, that's at least one benefit from the fact that it's having the fifth. When I was making my notes, trying to like, what does this remind me of when you put it together with the seventh house stuff? It's like, because it's like, seventh house new moon is like initiating new relationships, but then the Venus, Mars, Pluto could be like your first date is like right river rafting or something like that, or like extreme sports like Fear Factor bungee jumping or something. Like it's really intense and extreme and like like high adrenaline or something like that, flavoring the new moon. Or you could be doing that with your kids or something like that. Your kids are getting into like, skateboarding or like snowboarding or like, I don't know. There's something like extreme radical fun, but or sportiness maybe with this one. Um, It could also be like the Mars and Pluto could be like some conflicts that come out like competitive in competitive sports maybe. Your kid gets into like some fight at the in your kid's hockey game or something. I don't know. Are the kids even having hockey games these days? I'm just sort of throwing some stuff out there, anyways. Saturn and Mercury together in the sixth house is the sixth house typically has to do with health stuff, and could be Mercury often to me reminds me of like a pharmacist or a doctor or like a prescriber or something like that. So it could be like some kind of a new prescription or dealing with some sort of like serious health condition, but you're having an important communication around it with that Mercury element, like some kind of new insight or some kind of new treatment. Um, that or if you tie it into the fifth house stuff, if you're a parent, the there's the work of parenting could seem particularly hard right now. Maybe your kid's having some trouble with this pandemic stuff. The Mercury could be like also the influence of like a counselor, even like maybe taking your kid to like a school counselor if they're acting out in school and having a serious conversation. Because that Saturn stuff rules both the fifth and the sixth. Maybe that could be something about it, or maybe your kid has some health issues and it's tied in that way. Maybe it's not your health issues. Maybe it's like, uh, or I mean, the fifth also has for pregnancy, so there could be a lot of stuff to do with like fertility and sexual health maybe coming up. I'm just kind of throwing out some different options because there's obviously going to play out for different people in any number of different ways. I'm just giving a number of possibilities for what could work in a Virgo chart right now. Um, I was also thinking that Pluto has this sort of like underground, secretive, hidden quality. And when you combine that with the Venus in the fifth, it's sort of like having fun, like going out on a fun date or something like that. But with the Pluto, it could be like we're gonna go explore an abandoned mine shaft, or we're gonna go to the scary abandoned hospital or something, or like it's like going to sort of like creepy or disturbing places that are, but kind of in a fun way. Like it's like a horror movie or like a going ghost hunting or something. Like I don't know. Like this is where my mind's going with it, anyways. The Some other ones that I was thinking for this too was that Saturn often represents things which are old. I was talking a lot about kid stuff with that fifth house and that, but Saturn is also old stuff, so it could be um, health issues around aging or conversations around taking care of elderly people, because sixth house is service, right? Acts of service, and if you've got Mercury and Saturn in the sixth, that could be like, um, maybe your parents are getting older, and you're gonna take some time out of your schedule to help look after your aging parents, maybe. That could be another Saturn Mercury dynamic, maybe for especially with the sixth house. I don't know, just some ideas, anyways. I think I'm gonna move on to the next one. All right. Okay, so in a Libra rising chart, this new moon is happening in the sixth house, which has to do with things like acts of service, health, physical exercise, manual work, and activities, and that kind of thing. Um, because there's a new moon here with Jupiter, that generally stands for something positive, but it stands for kind of initiating something new. And primarily in the domain of health and wellness. There's also this, it's not just Jupiter, but there's Jupiter Neptune here. And what kind of brings to mind with this is like, um, there's the kind of a hopeful idealism towards what something that could be like a new kind of a treatment or a new kind of like something that deals with those sixth house health themes. But I think with the Neptune, I read it as being like the possibility of something that could be a bit kind of woo woo or not entirely accepted by the mainstream. Like if you were to start like a acupuncture or traditional Chinese medicine treatment, and you'd heard good things about it, but you're not sure whether it's to believe it all or not, or is it worth the hype or something, or there's something else, like maybe you're like, I mean, it's not just physical health, it could be like a new kind of a therapy, like going in for like psychedelic therapy for mental health or something, and that Jupiter and Neptune really brings in that boundary dissolving, more experimental quality. But there's the risk of like becoming deluded or getting detached from reality or something like that. But the aim with the sixth is something about working with your health, addressing some kind of a health condition, or either that or of being of service towards others, which is another. I mean, that's another thing that could happen here, is that Jupiter is a very altruistic, generous, benevolent kind of force. And in the sixth house, there's the kind of that quality of acts of service for others, doing things not for your own gain, and doing things too. The sixth house is this quality of stuff that's like the dirty jobs that people don't really want to do. But with Jupiter, there's this kind of generous, like, hey, I'll take care of that for you. I'll do it. And out of a kind of like good spirited warmness of like, the acts of taking care of others and stuff like that, and not wanting somebody to worry even about, whether they're competent or incompetent or independent or who's responsible. Jupiter is like, those are petty concerns for a Jupiter personality. That Jupiter is just like, because it's just the good thing to do, we're going to do it kind of thing. And the certain charitable quality with that Jupiter and Neptune. Although the Neptune quality is almost like, is the charitable quality misplaced, right? Like sometimes there's something about people who do, let's say, like Christian missionary work. I don't know. I'm not the most religious person specifically myself, but when people do religious missionary work, and if they get there's something about the idealism in that which seems a bit naive. Like there could be some problems that, the white savior or something like that you're not, it could be coming from a good-hearted place, like the person's all good intentions, but maybe there's stuff about it that it's like you're not seeing the whole picture, that maybe it's not quite developed yet or something like that, or a bit needs a bit more worldly experience to sort of like see the flaws in it. So it's not, I think, with the Neptune, you just got to be careful, because you might think things are a lot more perfect than they really are. If I keep moving on to the other signs here, we've got Venus, Mars, and Pluto in the fourth house, which has to do with your family, your parents, your ancestors. And there's Venus, Mars, and Pluto is a pretty intense one. Mars and Pluto on itself can be pretty violent kind of conflict. Venus is there, which kind of might help to make things a bit better, but there's definitely some sort of like deeply rooted stuff. And the Pluto stands for secrets, And the fourth house is the bottom of the chart, so it's like stuff that's really buried, stuff that's kind of like secrets of your family history that may be coming out, or there's some kind of conflict or tension or about the stuff that people don't talk about, right? Like it's kind of like this thing about like what's going on in the family that people aren't talking about. I think is a big theme with this Venus Mars Pluto stuff if it's in the fourth house for Libra rising. And the fifth house is also ruled by Saturn, and fifth house has to do with kids, but there's this sort of like there's this like big problem to do with like, maybe kids, or there's something. Otherwise, there's something. This fifth house has to do with having a good time, having fun, but that Saturn there is like this heavy leaden weight which needs to get moved out of the way if you're going to lighten up a bit. And at least Mercury's there, so there could be some opportunity to have some communication around stuff. But it's sort of like for everything to do with family stuff, parental stuff, children stuff, raising kids, parenting, or dealing with your own family. It's sort of like a heavy, conflicted kind of time right now. Those could relate to certain, I don't know, like stresses, health concerns, and stuff like that. There's more optimism in the sixth house if you're going in for some sort of treatment or some kind of therapy. um, that's a pretty optimistic thing right now. But when you're looking at like the background of like, maybe you go into therapy, but then some stuff comes up in the therapy that's about your past, about your family history, about maybe intergenerational trauma or something like that. So that there could be some pretty like, yeah, you get the impression, right? Like there's some heavy material to be dealt with, but in a therapeutic sense, that it could be a promising time to make some new steps in that kind of direction, right? Yeah, that's what I get from a Libra rising chart for this one. Okay, so for Scorpio risings, this new moon in Pisces is happening in the fifth house, which is pretty sweet considering that, the fifth house is the house of good fortune. It's all about play and having fun and light-hearted stuff. And Jupiter is there in its traditional sign of its domicile. Um, and so Jupiter is all about being generous, expansiveness, about benevolence. Um, it's also said that Jupiter is sort of like it's where you can expect to have things. If you've got a good expectation that things are going to turn out well, Jupiter kind of is a good sign for that, especially if it's in its own domicile. It's not. It's in the if it's in the chariot. It's not getting hurt by the rays of the sun here, and so the sun is shining a light in this area, getting influenced by this strong Jupiter, and it all looks very nice. And more okay. What does this mean though? So, the fifth house traditionally stood for stuff like your children. So if people were thinking about having kids, it's like fertility and pregnancy and all this kind of stuff. It's sort of like the energies are very strongly in favor of that stuff for Scorpio risings at this point in time. um However, it doesn't have to be about childbirth and having kids. It could also be about, um in more modern times, the fifth house has come to represent the creative aspect, because it's kind of like the being the fertility of the fifth house for childbearing could also be like creatively fertile, like you're rich with creative possibilities, or that you have a creative vision that you're giving birth to. Or that if you could compare it to that children have this natural inclination to play, and that oftentimes when we are creating even the most, great works of art that are seem to be very sophisticated and of high culture, still may have this attitude where the artist is really just playing, right? They're having fun and playing with what you can do with a medium, and so that kind of childlike act of play, you can see it in people like Picasso, maybe, who worked hard to paint like a child to bring that childlike, playful quality into serious fine art or whatever. So these kinds of dynamics are especially strengthened because of that strong Jupiter. And Neptune's there, um, which could bring a kind of like intoxicating kind of quality. I mean, it could be like with fifth house. It kind of looks like party time to me, but the don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do too crazy with it. But it's there's it's some other with all the heavy stuff going on. I think having a nice new moon in Pisces is at least a astrological transit that we can be optimistic about. Um, the other stuff, though, in this chart, so it's sort of indicative of the other side of things, the heavier qualities, because we've got 5 planets in the Saturn ruled signs. For example, Venus, Mars, and Pluto having that triple conjunction in the third house of Capricorn. This third house stands for things typically like siblings, neighbors, whatever stuff happening in the neighborhood around town. Um, and because Venus is a social planet and Mars is a aggressive confrontational planet, that there is some tensions and conflicts that may be coming up either maybe with siblings or neighbors or stuff like that. The Pluto has this quality of secretive, hidden stuff. So sometimes it may be conflicts which are kind of like under the surface that are not coming out, but there's some sort of like hidden tension or something like that. Um, there could also be, I think, though, Mars is exalted here in Capricorn, and Mars being that kind of like fuel in the gas tank that gives you the power and energy to act, and that there could be you could work with all this stuff to have that Mars energy to be acting in the environment, even if it's just things like third house could be, going for a walk in the neighborhood, or maybe looking at your workspace or your environment and tidying it up a little bit or something like that, bringing that Venus thing in. Mars and Venus together could be productive, working towards Venus ideals or something like that. Um, and yeah, I don't know. You could probably work with it more productively, but there's some tensions there with that Capricorn stuff. And Saturn and Mercury there in the fourth, which has to do with your parents, could have to do with the house you're living in, could have to do with like the land you're on or your that kind of stuff. If you bring in the house that you're living in, the actual like kind of mundane association of the four house, and you combine that with a third because they're both Saturn signs, it could be a good time for like renovations in your local, renovations on your house, or doing work on the house, or it's still like I'm thinking it's still pretty cold where I'm living, but like there's a certain agricultural quality with Saturn, and so it could be a good time to start doing some weeds, pulling up the weeds, getting the gardens ready. It's like the very beginning of March. Get a start on it. Those are some I don't know. Those are some things that could apply with the Saturn stuff. It could also have to do with some conversations around parents. Maybe maybe you've got some parents who are getting older and you have to deal with some stuff, or I don't know, maybe you're who knows, but these are some ideas anyways with the Scorpio rising chart. Okay, so for Sagittarius rising, the new moon in Pisces is happening in the fourth house, which stands for your home living situation and your family, namely your parents. Um, and Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I imagine not everybody who's watching my astrology videos in this kind of economy me have the money to do something like buy a house, but let's say you were the kind of person who was looking to buy a house because this big new moon is happening in your fourth house, the sign that has to do with the actual place that you live, and the new moon stands for an initiating of a new beginning, and the Jupiter, the ruler of Pisces, is there in Pisces, creating strong Jupiter energy that's unaffected by the combustion of the sun because it's protected from its own domicile. This is very beneficial, positive influence from Jupiter here, with maybe a Neptune influence, which may kind of exaggerate it, make things look like things might seem too good to be true. It might even be, if you go, it's like maybe you're not buying a house. Maybe if you have to move, if you have to like find a place to live, it would also be a good transit for that, I would say. It's the kind of thing that like you were gonna look for a place to live. You With under transit like this, you'd find a place that looked like it was too good to be true. You'd be like, how did I find such an? It's like my dreams have come true. It's like paradise on earth. The vision has been realized. Like, pinch me, I'm dreaming. You know what I mean? Um, and so the whole thing, all I could say with the Neptune thing is that like maybe there is actually it's not as good as it looks. There could actually be some problems. It may not actually be perfect, but what you might as well, I would say, is if there's anything that you can do in these areas, you might as well go for it. It may not turn out to be 100% like your fantasies come true, but it's still a good shot. You might as well take it. Um, yeah. Um, so anything to do with finding, or I don't know, it could be like home renovations or redecoration or something like that. If you're not like completely just getting a new space and new living environment or something like that. But it's a good time to initiate some kind of beginning in this area, one way or another, or initiate something to do with your family. I don't know. You can use your imagination. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with that one right now. Um, if you look at the other stuff going on, though, um, Venus, Mars, and Pluto are all conjunct in the second house, which is, well, um, it's like the pressure is on, and the pressure is on in the house that has to do with making money. That's kind of how I look at it. So it could be it's either that or like belongings too. So there could be a certain kind of like either this pressure to make money or this pressure to buy things or acquire things, and maybe with Pluto there it could be like a fixation, like a stubborn fixation, like you gotta have it or something like this. But there's a certain kind of drivenness with that concentration in Capricorn that I would be wary of, just because it's a strong energy, and this is the kind of stuff that could have it could be driven by this without being totally conscious that this is a force that's driving you. Um, and it could be be very highly motivating, which is our society values things like people who grind and such, and this could be a very grindy kind of transit for that second house stuff. But it's I don't, in my value system, that's not really the highest principle of what life is about. And I don't know, what can I say? It may just be a kind of a distraction from what the deeper message is, really, right? It could be kind of materialistic, maybe. Um, the third house, Saturn and Mercury are perfectly conjunct, and that has to do with either like siblings or neighbors or people in the local community. Um, and there's a kind, like, Saturn usually represents a kind of opposition, right? Saturn rules the opposition. So I was thinking that this could have to do with something like communication there with Mercury with people who have opposing views. Um, or that another one could be like, if you go with that finding a new place to live, maybe you're living with somebody, your room, like third house would be like a good one for your roommate, maybe, right? Maybe your roommate is like, you don't see eye to eye or something, like you kind of opposing views, but there's like Mercury is kind of mediating between these opposing viewpoints, right? Or um it's also like, I mean, Saturn also stands for things like age, so it could be, or like this kind of like unconscious factor, like senility or not being very smart or something like that. Those are other Saturn qualities. I mean, it also stands for things responsibility, like the authorities or something like that. So I don't know. Are these themes coming out right now? Communication with the authorities, communication with elderly people, communication with the senile, communication with the people who have different views from you, mediating around issues with those areas, communicating, uh, mediating between conflicts and stuff like this. Like this is more serious stuff when you look at the second and the third. Whereas the fourth just kind of looks like encouraging time to start something new with the fourth house stuff. That's my take for Sagittarius rising. Okay, Capricorn rising. There is a triple conjunction of Venus, Mars, and Pluto all happening in this sign of Capricorn, your first house. The first house stands for you personally, your identity, your body, your persona, all that kind of stuff. And with Venus, Mars, and Pluto, it's a extremely volatile time right now for you personally, I would say. The Mars stands for a kind of a warlike, aggressive, assertive quality, which in some way may be good because it shows that you may have more energy these days. It's maybe a good time for being physically active and such. But Pluto kind of cranks up the volume on this stuff, puts a tremendous amount of force behind it. And has to do Venus stands for a different principle to Mars, where Venus is more about people coming together and your friends. It generally stands for things like love and friendship and nice things and stuff like that. And it's experiences some friction when right up with Mars there, where it's like Mars is all about action and getting things done, and it's more independent, and Venus is more about coming together. That could be some tensions that come up between you and other people. Let's not forget here that Mars traditionally is the ruler of Scorpio, which is the 11th house where the South Node is right now. And Mars also rules Aries, which is the 4th house for Capricorn rising. And so social tensions, either in professional groups, organizations that you're part of, or maybe with parents, tensions in the family. These are all things that could be an issue right now. Um, if you look at Venus, Venus rules the 10th house as well as the 5th house. So there could be stuff to do with, work, career tensions, as well as dealing with kids. It's all over, because I'm kind of using this technique of looking at the rulerships, because the first house just has to do with you, but you can kind of expand on where these things are coming out. Um, if you look at the Saturn and Mercury in the second, that has to do with your ability to make money, um, and because Saturn is there, it's like Saturn can represent like a kind of a difficult stretch, where it could be you could be going through a phase right now where maybe you're feeling the recession, maybe business isn't going as well as you would like it, and you're getting through a kind of a barren time. Or that it could be that there is some sort of like particular project that you're working on for your job, but it's a particularly difficult one, and that is the it takes a certain kind of technical know-how or something like this. That when you have Saturn combined with Mercury, it could become overcoming the obstacles of like of a difficult area that you're working on or something. Um, or it could also have to do with like Saturn representing age and stuff like that. It could be like there's something to do with your work that involves dealing with old people, or a product or something like that that helps people that are sick or disabled or something like that. Um, or maybe you have some sort of business that has to do with the pandemic itself, maybe, or the pandemic is putting a lot of strain on your ability to make money. These are all sort of factors that could be coming up that are very much connected with the tensions that are around Venus, Pluto, and Mars, because they're both Saturn signs. So there could be some kind of like frustration around making money right now, that plays out with all this Aquarius and Capricorn placements. Um, and yeah, the third house is Pisces, where the new moon is happening, and that is going to be more positive of an influence than the Saturn stuff that I was talking about, because Jupiter is the greater benefic. It's well dignified in its own sign. Here, the third house has to do with things like short distance travel, your neighbors, your neighborhood, your siblings, sort of friends that are like your bros or whatever, or your your local community friends or something that are kind of like sibling relationships. There's something about initiating a new beginning around here. So it could be like a good time to take not large trips, but small trips to places that aren't that far away. Or, even like, I don't know, if it's March, if the sun starts coming out a little bit, it gets a bit warmer, to get out. And yeah, I mean, the third house stuff, it doesn't have to be, it's doesn't have to be the most like serious stuff, because it's not an angular house, right? Like, it's not like you're going to be doing the most important jobs of your life under this new moon. I would say it more like, going to visit somewhere, going on a nice hike or something like that. Um, having some pleasant interactions with your neighbors. Um, um, maybe checking up on siblings if you haven't spoken in a while. There's all this kind of stuff is just generally good under this transit, while there could be things to do with like, you know like I was saying, the money making could be difficult right now. So yeah, there could be certain areas which are tense and frustrating, but other areas where things could be genuinely pleasant and nice. Again, I don't want to use language like that. It just kind of is a boring way to talk, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like there's a there's more of an optimistic quality, but it may just be in a third house. I kind of feel like it's in, like appreciating the small things in life. The moon actually has its joy in the third house, so there's something about the third house which lends itself to sentimentality, like a certain sort of like, cozy neighborhood of just being like, of having, I'm thinking of that Louis Armstrong song, "It's a Wonderful World," where, despite all the things you may be stressed about, maybe you have if you just, people sharing a nice word with their neighbors, and, it's very like Mr. Rogers almost, right? Like that kind of quality. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood that, that maybe their life is worth living after all, despite all the problems. Like there is a sort of this sort of sunny kind of optimism here coming through, even if some other area in your life may be more stressful right now. That's kind of how I read it right now for Capricorn. Okay, so for Aquarius rising, the Pisces new moon is taking place in the second house. So the second house stands for basically making money, but your belongings, at a mundane level. Jupiter is in its own domicile here, and Jupiter is the greater benefic. So I would say this stands for a good opportunity for some kind of new beginning in terms of some kind of a business venture, where you're making, you're supporting yourself, making money, or, maybe even making an investment, or something to do with owning something, possessing something. Although with Neptune there, don't get too, don't, it's just if it's just stuff, right? If it's second house, or if it's not, don't get too, intoxicated by thinking this is the answer to all your problems or whatever, because it's not. But it's within realistic, reasonable, yeah, outlines. It should be pretty positive for second house concerns. However, now let's look at the other stuff going on. You, as an Aquarius rising, you've got Saturn in Aquarius transiting your first house, and Saturn has this quality of being kind of heavy, being kind of serious, and because it's in your first house sign, which has to do with you, your persona, your sense of self, there's a sort of sense of like, I don't know, it's like my first impression is like taking things seriously, feeling maybe a bit heavy, could be kind of depressing even. But Mercury is there, which is happening right at the same time as this new moon is a conjunction with Mercury and Saturn. So at least there is this opportunity for some communication to happen around it. And, Saturn can be like the wall, right? So it's like at least the ability to, it's like there's traffic coming in and out of the castle. You're not just like barricaded up and not letting anybody in, that there's actually some opportunity for some dialogue, for some communication. And I think that's probably one of the more optimistic things about this, although there is something about that Saturn, which could be, Aquarius is a fixed sign, like it could be very stubborn or like fixed in its position, or there could be the quality of having some kind of a blind spot, even maybe there's something you're not seeing and you're kind of obstinate in that, in not moving, not budging, or not, being able to see your own self-reflection or something. What's also interesting is that all this Capricorn action is happening in the 12th house, which often represents things like dreams, the subconscious. It also has to do with the sense of being isolated and stuff like that. So there could be this sense of being maybe kind of like distant and isolated and having some sort of frustration or struggle against that. Because I kind of feel like Mars and Venus and Pluto here, it's like Mars is an acting planet. And in other readings, I would say that it's like Mars is really going to work. But when Mars is in the 12th house, what is Mars going to work on? Like Mars is in, you know, it's like there's sort of like some frustration, but it's not frustration that's getting put into some, getting stuff done. It's just sort of like attacking, it's like you've got nothing to do, so you're kind of like it's getting, it's like you're stuck waiting in some isolating thing, just going around in your own head about it, which is not maybe not the most positive expression of Mars, right? Um, it, I mean, Pluto's there, and the 12th house Pluto stuff could be like some kind of transformative potential that maybe Mars isn't going out to like get stuff done, but Mars is pointing inwards and activating some internal transformative process. Um, but I don't know. It's like it all depends on how it's hitting your chart and how you're working with it and all that kind of thing. Um, I kind of get the impression though that if you're there, it would be like having troubling dreams or something with that Mars, Venus, Pluto. Like it's something that's coming up from the subconscious, that your subconscious is really like active, whereas you know, your your daylight, working life, day to day stuff may not be as active, but there's that Pisces dreamy quality. Like you're dreaming up some sort of business plan or dreaming up something that's going to make you some money, and you're getting all kind of excited and optimistic and idealistic with all that Jupiter Neptune stuff going on. But then that's kind of what you're consciously kind of daydreaming about, but there might be kind of like the nightmare, like there may become some sort of like tension or conflict that's driving it that you're not fully conscious of. And but maybe with communication, maybe you can kind of, some of that stuff will be brought to light, maybe. I don't know, I'm playing with it anyways. That's my take on Aquarius rising. Hey Pisces, the new moon is happening in your sign, which is the first house here. So the first house just stands for you, your persona, your body. And so there's something here that is a new beginning, some kind of a new initiation, which could be kind of like redefining yourself. It's going to be a new chapter in your life or something like that starting. Maybe a new perspective on things. Jupiter is here, which stands for growth and a kind of a generous, kind of Santa Claus like spirit, maybe. So, but it's in the first house. So there's something that's, I mean, you don't want to get like narcissistic about it, but there's something about like maybe like self love or self appreciation or, the sense that like maybe not needing to look outside yourself for fulfillment, that there's something of being kind of like centered in yourself. There's a certain kind of I think Jupiter and Neptune can bring in a kind of a spiritual teaching quality here. But yeah, in general, because this is your first house sign, it's generally a pretty positive one. If you look at some of these other placements, though, you've got Venus, Mars, and Pluto in the 11th house. The 11th house has to do with social networking. I often think of it more of like making professional connections and stuff like that, or people that are more like teachers or organizations that you join, like a club or something like that, that has to do with what you do for work or something. But with Venus stands for desiring, Mars stands for action, and Mars is like exalted here in Capricorn. It's not like, it is exalted. Excuse my speaking. Pluto is here, which is a very fixated, obsessive quality. So when you put all this stuff together, I kind of feel like it's like the sense of being hell bent on achieving your goals, like being very driven, being very motivated, and trying to make all the right connections, right? And I think there's something, well, I don't know, for better or for worse, that's just the energy we're dealing with here. Um, if we go down to Aquarius, Saturn is in its joy in the 12th house, which could emphasize a kind of isolating quality. Mercury is there though, so there's some sort of there's communication happening, but it's sort of like communication in isolation. And when you combine that with the 11th house, there's a kind of a drivenness to achieve or to seek help or to get the to reach the goal. But there's also like Saturn is like can represent this very sort of heavy, leaden, weighty quality, and in the 12th house that also emphasizes the quality of Saturn that has to do with like a blind spot or the unconscious. I mean, people talk about the 12th house as dreams and the unconscious sometimes. So that could be something here, maybe like lucid dreaming or doing some kind of therapy that brings stuff up from the unconscious, some repressed thing. Um, but there's, yeah, it's a kind of a slew of different influences we're working with here for Pisces because you're initiating something to do with yourself. And maybe, like, I was thinking that, like, when people do these, like, vision board exercises, it's a very vision board kind of thing for Pisces right now because it's like initiating some sort of new chapter of your life, but that stacked up 11th house is very much like your aspirations, your motivations, your goals, and stuff like that. But at the same time, you might be feeling kind of stuck, right? That you want to become unstuck. You want to like break free from the shackles that bind you, right? And that Saturn in the 12th could represent the sort of heavy quality of stuckness, and that maybe you're getting frustrated with it. You want to break free. You want to transform out of it, even with that Pluto quality of transformation there. You want to like, so there's this kind of thing of where you're kind of motivating yourself to sort of like get out of this kind of like stuck place in your life and you know making the vision board or whatever it is. This is all I find this is all very strong for Pisces right now, all this stuff. And I'm not just throwing out generic, astrology things. This particular Pisces chart, I feel like it brings it out. um okay, I'm gonna keep going now, on to the next one. Okay, so here we have the Aries rising chart. And I think this is a kind of an interesting one because there's a sort of interplay going on between active and passive dynamics. To show you what I'm talking about, let's start in the 10th house of Capricorn, where you have Mars, Venus, and Pluto all conjunct. Now, Mars is Aries' ruler, so that in itself shows something that that Mars Aries energy is focused right now in the 10th, which is an angular house. That's to do with your career, your work, your daily grind, and Mars is exalted here, so it's very strong, yangy, active energy, working, getting stuff done. But with that Venus, Mars, Pluto stuff, like so Venus and Mars together can designate some sort of social tensions, social conflicts. Can also be like the desire being Venus and Mars being the will or drive or action to get it. And then that mixing in with Pluto being a obsessive, fixated, long running, not going to give up quality. Pluto could also do with some sort of like secret things, like what's not being said here. Like you could be very active in your work through activity, but there's something that's not everything's like out in the open for some reason. Like there's something that's behind the scenes or something that's kind of shady about it maybe. or you could be involved in the criminal underworld even, or doing something, you know what I mean? Like that could also be Pluto. Like the Pluto could not necessarily be the best influence here. But either way, Mars is very active in the 10th house, working, getting stuff done. Um, and it's a Saturn ruled sign, so in a way, it's like Mars is working for Saturn, which is in the 11th house. Um, Now the 11th house, it's like it could like there's something about it which feels very like militaristic to me. Like it's I mean the whole stuff going on, all that Russia Ukraine stuff is going on in the background these days. Um when I was actually like I wasn't sure if I should go into this, but when I was trying to come up with a horoscope for Aries rising, I was looking at all this stuff. I was looking at the 12th house where we have this new moon in Pisces, and it's like initiating something, beginning something new in the part of the chart that has to do with stuff like on a mundane level. It has to do with prison, and it has to do with hospitals. And so it's like, I hate to say it, but I was thinking that like, like it was like if these protesters or something, like this could be the chart of a protester who's very active with 10th house is public. It's contentious with that Mars Venus stuff. It's obsessive. And then it leads to a new beginning in prison or something. You know what I mean? Like you could, like, the work you could be doing could be illegal and could wind you up in trouble with the authorities, and your new moon beginning could be a new beginning in jail or some, rehabilitation clinic or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, it could also be like less, it could be like, you work really hard and you put your back out and you have to recover or something too, right? The 12th house is going to be, I started this off saying there's an interplay between active and passive. Like the 12th house is a passive place. It's like you're in a hospital bed, you're in a jail cell, or maybe you go on a meditation retreat, right? They do this thing where they say chop wood, carry water. Like after you get enlightened, you still have to chop wood and carry water. And so that there could be like a meditation retreat that does involve a lot of work, like chopping wood and carrying water. Or that maybe you're doing like, Neptune and Jupiter and Pisces. It's very rich, fertile, what is it, the unconscious, the dream world, right? But then it's also very active in the day world of working and getting stuff done. So it's an interesting, like, I'm not really sure what angle to take on this one for Aries, because you've got strong unconscious dreamy influences, but then also being very active in the world. And maybe this is about becoming more conscious of what these dreamy under the surface forces are that are driving this worldly action, right? That could be it. The 11th house, there's something I was thinking has to do something about the authorities with that Saturn and Mercury. Like it's like getting help from the authorities. We're dealing with the authorities. It could be like there's that oppositional quality. So like maybe it could be like, you know, if somebody's like a kid who like is going on the wrong side of the tracks, or what I'm trying to say, like they're getting involved with stuff they shouldn't get involved with, and the authorities are trying to help them to get them in the right direction, but they take that help as being an opposition, like like they're just trying to repress me, the man is like, trying to control my life or something like that. So it could be that it's like taking the help as the enemy with that Saturn in the 11th house, maybe, right? Like, or maybe you're rebelling against that which is actually they're trying to help you, but you can't see it because you're too identified being like the angry, rebellious young person, and you see the old authority figure as being something very other from you. You haven't developed your own maturity. You haven't developed to be able to see yourself as the authority figure, so you see it as somebody else. And so you see like I don't know. I mean, with there's all this trendy stuff of like, being really against the police or whatever, right? But I mean, from an archetypical standpoint, though, if you if you're completely against ever having to play the police role yourself, then you're just putting all that onto somebody else and then blaming them for doing the job that you don't want to do. Or else when you do the job, then you get accused of being a hypocrite because you're like, oh no, look, you're just as much of an authoritarian as the ones you're rebelling against, right? I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing on it at this point, but these were some things that I thought of for Aries. I don't know. Make of it what you will. So for Taurus rising, the new moon in Pisces is happening in the 11th house, which generally stands for things like goals, social networking, making connections, being a part of a larger group or organization. And because Jupiter is in its own domicile in Pisces, and Jupiter is the greater benefic, that's an encouraging sign for all of what I said. For if you're gonna, and the new moon stands for initiating a new beginning. So if you're looking to get involved, to join a new organization, to join a new group, to make some efforts to make new friends, to expand your social circles, to get involved in charitable work, even because I think Jupiter has a very benevolent, altruistic kind of presence. So it's the getting involved with a community with some kind of a higher aim to like make a difference in the world, to make the world a better place, as cliche as that may be. I think that's all coming through right now for a Taurus rising chart. However, there are some other areas which may be showing a bit more tension. For example, Venus, Mars, Pluto in the ninth house. The ninth house stands for your principles, which are like the guiding light. Like, what are the principles which guide your direction in life? And because Mars is there, god of war, and Venus is like the social planet, there's a certain social tension coming up around conflicts around values and principles, or ninth house also has to do with spirituality and religion and stuff like that. So they could have to do with disagreements around those subjects. Pluto can be a very fixed or obsessive kind of quality. It could have a lot of Pluto could also bring in this sort of like the shadow quality of like the hatred for people who think differently from you or something like this. So while on one hand there could be a very a well-to-do, wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to have some sort of charitable effect in the world, there could also be a major conflict where you have major disagreements with people who have different views than you, and that there could be a sense of combativeness even. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. The If you look at Aquarius, which is another Saturn ruled sign with Saturn there, that's the 10th house, which stands for the actual work you're doing. And well, I'm interpreting Saturn these days as being a kind of heavy package to move, basically. I think of it as Mercury. I was thinking Mercury as being like a courier or a messenger or a delivery service. But what Mercury is delivering is very heavy and cumbersome, and it's exhausting and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like whether you're dealing with stuff at work which is actually physically large and heavy and difficult to move around, or maybe you are dealing with subject matter which has that quality, like you're dealing with heavy topics that wear you out, that are maybe depressing or tiring or something like that, that is a another quality to this. Like it could be a time when the work is particularly serious, but there's a sense of responsibility. Like it's a very, like it really needs to get done, and you're taking a huge responsibility on your shoulders by addressing it. Um, and um, and yeah, I mean, with the Neptune and Jupiter, there's at least a sort of there's a kind of idealism there, that you're doing good work, that you're hopeful and optimistic for the future, but you've got a heavy load to deal with, and that you may be feeling conflicted or even confrontational and aggressive when it comes to your beliefs and your principles. This is the general picture that I see for Taurus rising right now. So here we have the chart for Gemini rising. The new moon in Pisces is taking place in the 10th house, respected to the sign. And the 10th house is associated with things such as career, your daily work, things you do in public. And it's an angular house, so it's an active house, so it's a very strong transit for a Gemini rising. Um, it's because Jupiter is its own sign of domicile, I'm viewing this as a very positive kind of transit. Um, Although, Neptune is there, and I think Neptune can give the kind of picture of things being too good to be true. But so maybe things may not be quite as good as they appear, but there's promising new beginnings taking place in the 10th house. So to put it very mundanely, like if you were to start a new job, like this would be a good time for it. Yeah, Gemini rising, if you're looking for new jobs, new projects to begin to initiate, yeah, I would say this is a great time. I mean, maybe as you'll have to work out the kinks as you go on, but this is the beginning as a new moon we're talking about here. So it's a great time to begin new projects. The other stuff going on right now is a little bit more difficult because you've got some contentious action in the Saturn signs. Here you have Venus, Mars, and Pluto in Capricorn, the eighth house. The eighth house typically has to do with things like loss and debts and dependencies and things like that. The good news, I would say, well, it depends on how you handle this one, probably. Venus stands for desiring, coming together. Mars stands for splitting apart and disagreeing or fighting or something. So there can be a kind of a friction between both of them. Or Mars could also be trying to like work hard and fight for what Venus wants. But they're in the eighth house. And what the eighth house stands for is like there's certain like it's dealing with the ending of things, right? Like it could be like inheritance that comes after someone has died, or if somebody goes through a divorce and the possessions get split up or something like that. And so there's some sort of contention or disagreement about this stuff. Like it could be disagreement with whether a will was distributed fairly, or disagreement with whether a divorce was settled fairly. It could also be the eighth house can represent a kind of a denial in a way, where if something is coming to an end but you don't want it to come to an end, then Venus and Mars and Pluto will fight very hard to resist the ending. It's also could be like if you are, I think there's like stuff to do with like substance dependency. Like if you're in a lot of pain, it could be like the desire for some sort of pain reliever to like, ease your suffering or something like that. Um, but there's a general kind of thing where it's like if you're, the problem with the eighth house stuff is that if you're resistant to things ending, if you're resistant to loss, if you're resistant to, I don't know, your ties to other people. I mean, one thing that could come out of this, which is good, because Mars is exalted here, and Mars has to do with severing and splitting and breaking up, and Pluto has this transformative quality that the eighth house, it's sort of like if you're tied in with other people through dependencies, I, like you're, if you have a partner that you've broken up with, but you have to all your stuff is still at this person's house, and you have to get all your belongings back, and you're like that bastard still has my stuff, and or whatever, or you have to like, there's something with that Mars and Pluto, which could be like to really severing the contacts, to really disentangling yourself out of these sort of like shared agreements, these shared, like if your name is, if you're an owner of a business that's like tanking, like it's like to get out of there, right? To disconnect yourself from influences which are not very good. It may be a good time for that. The ninth house, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of jumping topics here, but they're both Saturn signs, so they could be connected. The ninth house has to do with religion, philosophy, higher ideals, as well as maybe going to school for like university, some higher learning. Saturn is there in his own domicile, though. So there could be something like, maybe if it's doing some like really intense PhD thesis work where like it could be like writing or communicating about really dense and difficult, heavy topics with that Saturn there. Or it could be Mercury could be like, it's like mediating between conflicts, but it's like at the level of that ninth house philosophical principle thing. So it's sort of like, you know, it's almost, it reminds me of like writing a thesis paper where you are reconciling these two opposing viewpoints, but from a very philosophical kind of position where you could be looking at two, you could be writing a paper about like, Marxist communism and like laissez-faire capitalist neoliberalism, which are two very polarized things, and you could be making some sort of a statement which handles both of them without taking sides. That is like somehow, I don't know, I'm just kind of riffing here, right? But like that's what this Mercury goes back and forth between these different, it's like the gender bender of the planets. Like it can do this, it can play for both teams. And so, whereas Saturn represents more of this barrier between these two different, this is the dichotomy. So it's like, it's all about the philosophy of transcending the dichotomy. Yeah, it even rhymes. And that's Mercury. The Mercury is the Gemini's chart ruler too. So it's an interesting time for Gemini for sure. Very active because this new moon's taking place in Pisces. So you've got like active work with Pisces, good time for starting new jobs, but then also this really interesting philosophical dynamic coming up with the ninth house stuff, and then also social stuff is going to get sorted out. That Mars, exalted Mars, it's like a Mars which isn't gonna, what's the saying I'm looking for? It's not going to pull any punches, right? Like this is a Mars. It's like it wants to get in there and get stuff done and sort out the mess. And it's like sorting out the mess of entanglements where you're like, I don't want to be on the hook for like, this project anymore. I'm getting out of this. I'm starting a new project, right? I'm starting this new thing that looks really promising. And sorry, you can't keep calling me up for all this other bullshit. I'm out of here, right? Like that could be what this is a Gemini chart is saying right now. Okay. There we go. Okay, so yeah, that's my video for the new moon in Pisces. If you guys want, I haven't been as busy with this stuff recently, but I am certified in doing natal horoscope readings from Nightlight Astrology. who I definitely recommend, Chuda. He's one of my favorite astrologers still. And if you want to learn how to do astrology readings, I definitely recommend his channel. If you guys are interested in having a natal chart reading, I'm totally not busy right now. So feel free to write me an email at danwburkett@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or leave a comment or something. Um, yeah, I am. Yeah, I don't know. If you want astrology readings, I'm available for it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be making lots of music, basically, right? So, I mean, if you don't want an astrology reading, I've got other things to keep myself busy with. But if you do want one, I'm just saying it's an option. Just reminding you. Okay. And like and subscribe and whatever. Tell all your friends to follow my my astrology and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, great. Thanks.